Welcome to Blue Yonder Life. Today's topic is the shifting supply chain sustainability focus. The 2022 State of Supply Chain Sustainability Report, conducted by the MIT Center of Transportation and Logistics and also the Council of Supply Chain Management, CSCMP, professionals, CSCMP, contains new insights on how supply chain sustainability, SCS in short, goals and investments evolve over time, and how SCS priorities differ around the world. We're so glad to have with us a panel of five speakers for this session. So please say hi, panelists. Yes, as this is a short session and we'll have a longer session at CMP, by the way, we'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves when it's their turn to speak. Okay, and to the audience, please type in questions along the way. We'll answer them here, or we will make sure that we will answer them after the session. So we'll go straight to the question now to save time. So David, you are very much involved with the research day to day. So can you introduce yourself first and speak briefly about why the report is saying that there's an uptrend on supply chain sustainability? Thank you.
Sure, happy to. Thank you very much, Terrence, and thank you to Blue Yonder for being a part of the report and for convening this forum that all the co-presenters and sponsors of the report can get together. So my name is Dr. David Carell. I'm a research scientist at the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics, and I'm the project lead for this third installment of the annual State of Supply Chain Sustainability Report. What we do with the report is a large global survey, and we're really trying to get a sense of how firms all over the world are prioritizing and understanding supply chain sustainability. When we do it, we divide that big topic up into pieces. So supply chain sustainability can include things like climate change mitigation efforts, commitments to supplier diversity, equity, and inclusion, water conservation. And it can also include things like we want to understand where does the pressure come from to improve supply chain sustainability. And I think Terrence's question gets right to the first take-home point of this year's report is that we divide the topic of sustainability up into a lot of different pieces, different components of sustainability, different pressure sources. But this year, compared to last year, everything went up. Firms' goals related to supply chain sustainability went up on every measure that we took, and the pressure that firms reported feeling went up from every source that we measured. So I think the real take home is that it's a burner that's constantly getting hotter.
Thank you so much for the insight. I'm sure that you give us more, and I think we will. So we'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves one by one and give their insights on whether they are seeing the same trends. So let's start off with Greg with CSCMP. Please introduce yourself and answer the question.
Great, thanks, Terrence. So my name is Greg Scrovan. I serve on the board for the Council of Supply Chain Manager and Professionals, which is a professional association, been around about 60 years now, almost 60 years. It's really dedicated on education, research, and advancement of the supply chain profession. So as part of our charter around research, we're proud to have partnered with MIT and David's team in sponsoring this or creating this the third annual sustainability report. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And in my day job, I direct the circular economy program for reverse logistics within Intel. So one of the things a couple of things that struck me from the report was, I think what we're seeing more and more is that supply chains are almost gathering or assuming a two-pronged responsibility. One, it's the timely delivery of supply and enabling profitability for our companies. But also, I think there's a growing expectation in what the supply chains are expected to do from the standpoint of the environment and society. I think the report highlighted just that those growing expectations beyond just what our core responsibility has historically been. I think also what we're seeing is there is really no industry that's insulated from the impacts of supply chain sustainability, but also from kind of a responsibility to do something about it. And we see that quite often with the diversity of the CSCMP membership. There's no one that really is insulated from it. And then lastly, as I think one of the things we'll hear commonly throughout the session today and was in the report was just the growing pressures both externally from customers, analysts, governments, but also internally from the C-suite down through procurement, and really across the employee base, who are all kind of driving and expecting that companies and their supply chains are doing more. So I think the report was spot on a lot of what we've seen. So really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the insight. We'll get back to you in the next question. So maybe Dalma, can you introduce yourself and answer the question too?
Sure. Thank you. Delma Ramirez from Avetta, Principal Sustainability and ESG. And at Avetta, we're a software as a service solution, cloud-based, really focusing on supply chain sustainability risk, really having various modules running through health and safety, cybersecurity, and of course, ESG and sustainability. And really what we've observed is quite, mirroring to the report, where a lot of our clients are really pursuing transparency across the supply chain, and with a focus in measuring greenhouse gas emissions, really wanting to understand that traceability, and the level of maturity by which they approach us at is varied. So really understanding the landscape of where their suppliers are based in, kind of globally all over the world, and the nuances that has in terms of their impact, which was also reflected in the report based on company size and location. I think is very relevant as well, including kind of the technologies that they're being used, and kind of the level of application, and really that pressure also coming from a lot of the investors, as well as consumer awareness has also brought them in. So there's definitely an uptrend there that we're seeing kind of on our day-to-day basis and reporting as well.
Thank you, Dalma. We'll get your insights again in the next question. And then it's Christian's turn. So please introduce yourself, Christian, and answer the question.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here, and good afternoon. I'm Christian Pillar, Vice President of Research and Sustainability at Project 44. Specific to sustainability, Project 44's goal is to help our shipper customers understand their Scope 3 emissions. Traditionally, transportation-related emissions data has been inaccessible and inaccurate. We're looking to change that. Looking at the report, the two main things that stood out to me was the age distribution of the respondents. So more than 50% were 25 to 44, which is the group of individuals that are going to solve this problem. Those are the individuals that came of age in the digital era and have challenged norms previously. So it's exciting that those people that will be in the workforce when the goals of net zero goals of 2040 and 2050 are so well represented in this report. And then secondly, investors are putting the most pressure to increase supply chain sustainability. So investors tend to do well at knowing what are fads and what technologies are needed in the future. So the fact that the investors have increased their pressure over the last 2 years highlights that supply chain sustainability will be a must-have if it isn't already.
Thank you. So we'll get your insights again in the next question. Last but not least, Hongmo, please introduce yourself and answer the question to question 1.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Hongmo Yang, Senior Vice President of Industry Strategy for Manufacturing and 3PL for Blue Yonder. As related to the report, the things that really kind of stood out for me was, and this is in the context of all the news that we hear about, climate change and some of the drought and weather that we had, in the East Coast and over in Europe, and wildfires and so on. I found it really interesting that there's, with climate change and some of the sustainability issues, there are no boundaries, national boundaries, and yet there are a little bit of a difference in terms of how different regions of the world view the priority or criticality of sustainability. And I think part of what that is raising is, how do we make sure that everybody's on the same page, and what are the specific things that we can be doing? And from a supply chain perspective and sustainability, there are things that we can do to, one, measure what is the the carbon footprint that we have as a organization, and then two, looking at some of the various steps that companies are taking in order to get a better handle on sustainability initiatives, and looking at that as a potential footprint toward how do you actually get the baseline and then pathway toward improvement. So those are some of the things that really kind of stood out.
Thank you, Homo. So let's ask another question, and we have questions coming in, so you can see the questions in the comment tab. Okay. So the next question is concerning companies. What companies are doing? So what sustainability initiatives are company and supply chain operations taking on, and how are we helping them? So before we answer the question, this is a chart from the survey report that illustrates the various initiatives, such as supply chain audit at the bottom of the staircase, and then supplier training, and also carbon offsets at the top of the staircase. Okay, so I think let the panel answer the question. So we'll get this time Christian with P44 to answer the question first.
Yeah, happy to answer the question. I think the graphic is wrong. I think that's a graphic for the next question. There we go. So this is the one that talks about supplier auditing and carbon offsetting. Great. So I see that many companies focus on supply chain mapping and collaboration, which is really linked to real-time visibility, which is what Project 44 does. In supply chain mapping, knowing where all your shipments and products are, where the delays are, which suppliers can fulfill orders, what customers' needs are essential to running an efficient supply chain. An efficient supply chain is key to supply chain sustainability. And the next piece would be collaboration, where supply chain collaboration and real-time visibility are key enablers to collaboration. Shippers now have the high fidelity data to understand which areas require focus to improve cost, performance, or emissions. So this focus highlights who are the key trading partners that the focus area, the key trading partners in that area of focus, which drives that collaboration. So for me, supply chain mapping and collaboration are two absolutely essential pieces of supply chain sustainability.
Yes, and I believe that we'll get more of your insights at the CSCMP event, okay, in September. So maybe we'll ask Delma to answer in turn. Thank you, Delma.
Thank you, Terrence. So I actually really like this graph because at the bottom, you have the supplier audit, and that's based on the data, this is the most accepted practice. Internally, we think of supplier audits in many different phases. I mentioned before supplier maturity, and I think that's a big one. So supplier audits really can be either based on a questionnaire, they can have verification, they can have on-site visits as well. So I think that entire scope of what we view as supplier audits should not be taken for granted, because it does show up in various ways in practice. And it is, of course, largely practiced based on the maturity of the supplier and kind of the appetite of the client to want to report and to answer to whether it be investors or simply to mitigate that risk internally. And another observation also from the same graph was kind of at the very top right of that staircase being carbon offsetting, and kind of the difficulty that any supplier has to go through to reach that level, because really having to map their entire supply chain through, of course, greenhouse gas emission calculations, scope 1, 2, and 3. And so really that being a challenge, not only of data and measurement, but really communication and culture and education, right? So I think from that supplier audit baseline to achieve that carbon offsetting is quite a challenge, and a challenge that we're actually proud to say that we're working on here at Avetta through partnership. But it's something that you can't just jump on, right, and take on this best practice, because of course it does require a lot of data and patience and culture change. So happy to keep speaking about that later on as well.
Yes, and we'll talk to you again at the CSCMP event. So very glad that you're appearing today. So Hongmo, maybe you can answer the question next.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, in order for you to actually make improvements, you have to have a pretty good handle on where are you currently. So you need to be able to measure what your current baseline performance is. And so the measurement of knowing, okay, what is my current carbon footprint is really important in terms of being able to take improvements. What I find really interesting, and I think this is kind of inherent in any supply chain, is that you're not an island. You exist in an ecosystem of partners, whether they be third-party shipping or collaborating, supplying, or even customers. And what a lot of the items that are initiatives that are listed really point to the fact that you are not, existing in an island, that you have to work in conjunction with your customers, your suppliers, and then being able to have a good idea of, how is your current, for example, sustainability performance as a baseline. And only when you have that visibility and when you have that baseline measurements, are you able to start thinking about how much should we be improving? What should we be doing in order for us to make those types of improvements that you want to be able to achieve?
Yeah, thank you. So again, we'll talk to you again at the CSCMP event. So next up would be we'll ask Rick to answer the question too.
Sure. A couple things that stood out for me. The first was the collaboration across the ecosystem. I think it's so important, especially if you're more of an ingredient type supplier, that you understand what the goals or aspirations are of your customers. And then you're able to collaborate with your customers, with your suppliers, with your other ecosystem partners to design the sustainability into the products and into the solutions versus trying to clean up afterwards. And I think the other point that I thought the study did a great job highlighting was this combination of the environmental sustainability focus areas alongside some of the more corporate responsibility areas around code of conduct, et cetera. So continued focus that we're seeing around climate change, and Christian mentioned scope 3, which I think is right in the crosshairs for the supply chain professional and understanding what that means and how we deal with it. Upcycling, recycling, those types of opportunities in the environmental CO2 space and reuse space. But then also the importance of code of conduct and understanding what's happening with your suppliers and applying some of those diversity and equity and inclusion concepts up your supply base and up through your suppliers, and just understanding the history of your products. So I think that combination of both the sustainability and the corporate responsibility piece was pretty interesting to see, and I think is going to continue to be a key focus area.
Thank you. So we'll talk to you again at the CSCMP event. And David, last but not least, to answer this question.
Sure, gosh, I'll be brief because there's been so many great insights already shared. One thing that if some of the people who are watching this haven't had a chance yet to read the report, we would encourage you to do so at sscs.mit.edu. And thanks to the generous support of our sponsors, we can make that freely available to anyone. That staircase, I really liked how Delma pointed that out. We really designed it that way so that any reader could look at sort of which rung of the staircase of practices they find themselves on to get an idea towards what's the next level up. And I'd like to point out that if you go to the online version, and you can see it here in this chart, you can filter this by industry. So you can look at firms specifically within your industry and by geography. So you can make pretty close comparisons to firms that are doing what your firm does in your part of the world.
Thank you. And looking forward to your hosting of the CSCMP sustainability session, next month. Okay. Let me ask the last question, and I think we have less time, but please answer them as usual. Okay. So there's a very interesting section in the report about the shifting focus, goals, and investments. So please show the diagram. Okay, so please, analysts, can you discuss your views on the focuses and predictions on where the investment will go in the next few years? We'll start from with Greg first, please.
Sure. I think one of the things that jumped out to me as far as the focus area from 2020 to 2021 was the impact on, or the focus on the impacts of climate change. And I think what we're seeing is that climate change is not just something that the conservationists and the scientists and the politicians have to solve, but that it's something that impacts all of us, and we have to understand what we can do to reduce some of those impacts, but also what we can do to mitigate the impacts. So I think moving forward, my prediction is we would continue to see that area grow. I think as all of us in the profession have to deal with the issues from natural disasters and supply scarcity and other disruptions, we need to be able to try to mitigate and slow down those impacts, but also we need to ensure we have resilient supply chains that can respond when that happens. And then secondly, I think the whole area of circularity and end-of-life management is going to continue to become important. And I think the driver for this is the scarcity of supply and the supply chain constraints. Circularity really provides that opportunity to create some level of supply through reuse and recovery, but it also provides that sweet spot where we can actually show financial benefit from investments in circularity. So I think we're going to continue to see that as a growing area to not only generate supply and help the bottom line, but also to reduce consumption and across our raw materials and across the supply chain.
Thank you. So David, you're up next.
Gosh, it's such an interesting question, and I'll try to be very brief. I'm looking forward to everyone's predictions. But if I had to sum up what we've learned in the past two reports, is that in the first year where we had a delta, a comparison we could make, social issues surged. In the second time we could make a comparison, just as Greg just pointed out, environmental issues surged, particularly climate change mitigation. If I had to look or predict what will happen in next year's report, I'm predicting energy conservation will rise in importance for a few reasons. One, there's the landmark legislation that's moving on to the White House now in the United States that I think will provide some incentives for those activities. We were just talking when we got on the call about the weather all over the world and the heat waves and the kind of problems that people are experiencing, and I think that brings energy to the light. And then third, our European readers, our European community is potentially looking at a winter without access to Russian hydrocarbons this year. So I think all of that will really augur for increased attention to energy conservation.
Thank you so much, David. Christian, you're up next.
Yeah, so my prediction really is that diesel trucks and conventional powered vessels are going to be with us for years to come. It's going to be quite some time before electric trucks and alternative propulsion vessels like LNG and ammonia will be commercially viable at scale, which means that there's data, insights, and workflows needed to do better now. Especially when we look at how many electric trucks there are. Statista said there's about 10,000 electric trucks of the larger class, longer haul type in 2018, and there's 324,000 projected in 2026. So it's going to be a while before electric trucks are even 1% of the roughly 200,000 new trucks purchased annually. Which means that companies that are waiting for alternative propulsion vessels to help them meet their net zero goals by 2040 or 2050 may not get there. So there is investment in technology to get the data to help companies make that more efficient cost versus performance versus emissions decision. And I hope to see a lot of investment by the entire supply chain community in finding better ways to use diesel trucks and conventional powered vessel in the coming years before those other types are commercially viable at scale.
Yeah, we hope so too, certainly. So thank you. So Delma, you're up next. Please answer the question.
Yes, I think, it's really interesting to hear everyone's perspective and really looking at just what has been happening already, I think, within the industry and why there's been such a big push for supply chain traceability. I think a lot of it has to do, of course, with risk mitigation, but underpinned by regulation and really underpinned by international frameworks pushing for this reporting for this data. So really here my prediction lies with actually biodiversity, and really taking into consideration that the CDP, Climate Disclosure Project, and the GRI as well, Global Reporting Initiative, have introduced this new approach to environmental management, right, and environmental reporting, and have said, hey, biodiversity is a key pillar of this reporting structure, and of course, what it actually does within the supply chain, and now companies are trying to find ways on how best to report this kind of data. So technology, of course, will evolve to be able to trace that, and of course as well the sustainable development goals, and them reporting that there's not enough data within this particular scope. So innovation in non-traditional data capture, I think, will be kind of a pivotal shift when it comes to kind of the growth of all of this mandated reporting and new regulation kind of spurring up.
Thank you, and we look forward to talking to you again in the event. Okay, in September. So last but not least, Hongmo, can you close out the answer for us?
Sure. I have 3 points. One is I find it very interesting that there's some non-negotiables like welfare and safety and human rights protection that are very high, and I would hope that those are non-negotiables and that they continue to be very high going forward. In terms of predictions, I agree with David, who kind of talked about, and I think Greg as well talked about energy savings and conservation. With all of the regulation and bills that have been passed recently, I do think that energy savings and renewable energy become, continuing to be a, high scored item. But as a consumer, there's one other thing that I would like to see happen, and that is, we are seeing more and more of the scarcity of water, and I do think that, or I should say, I would hope that water conservation becomes a higher priority going forward, because it will become a scarce, more scarce item going forward. So less of a prediction, more of a hope, but the prediction would be more related to energy savings and renewable energy.
Thank you, and again, Hong Mo, we will speak to you again. David will speak to you again in the event next month. Okay, so I think I've plugged enough the event next month. But thanks for the insights, panelists. Really grateful for your time. And just to continue the conversation, David will host a 1-hour session, actually multiple hour sessions on this report at the CSCMP Edge event in September. So stay tuned. And if we have further updates on the innovations this year or next year, can you all be back and have another discussion with us?
Gladly.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Great. So again, thanks for your time. And to the audience, thank you for your attention. And please continue to submit questions, and the speakers will answer them accordingly. So we look forward to seeing you in the next engagement. Okay, right. Let's say goodbye to the audience together, and and we'll end the session. Thank you so much for the time.
All right.